sort of meteor scatter type stuff a while back, and then talking with Brian, we decided something a bit more FT-8 specific would probably be better for just now. I'm quite glad we managed to pull this off actually with a Zoom meeting, because I think for now it's quite nice actually to be able to carry on doing this sort of thing. So everyone can see the presentation hopefully, so I'm going to kick on through. He says hopefully. The 26 slides in total, so I'm probably aiming to be about 20-25 minutes probably on this, maybe less. If we kick on, right, so the take-home message hopefully from the end of this presentation, which I threw together in the last 24 hours, is that FT-8 is it's a nice way to accomplish more QSOs, do better distances for a given setup versus voice, and all the rest of it. Originally, the presentation I created was focused on sort of the VHF side of things, so that's where some of this is focused on. So it can certainly make VHF more fun. Certainly, I know some people in this chat group just now who do FT-8 and similar modes on VHF, and they do quite well from it. Consider it's sometimes hard to explain things, but the way I approach FT-8 is it's the weak signal performance of the mode. I don't think of as a weak performance. I think of it as a gain of the system, and how it's another way to improve your station without actually buying a big antenna for all the rest of it. Contrary to a lot of belief, FT-8 is quite easy to get started on. There's a few options for that I'll go through, but I'll focus on WSJTX. And as I pointed out just before, that this presentation originally this one's created from was from a VHF sort of orientated one. So apologies if you find a lot of VHF orientated comments and bits as we go through. There's a lot on here you don't know me so well, so I thought I'd put a quick slide in to say who I am. Originally licensed, when's that now, 23 years ago or something like that. Started in CB when I was about 9, and started doing data and all the rest of it on 11 meters and a little bit on 45 for anyone that used to play on there. I never took a Morse license, so I was only ever a Class B up until they got rid of the Morse thing. So my focus again was on VHF, hence the comments I'm making around that. And I accidentally got into MGM. So MGM it's a funny one because it's machine generated modes, but people talk about MGM modes. So it's machine generated modes. So I got interested in that by accident one time by hearing someone calling CQ and a meteor shower on SSB. I then got into meteor scatter modes, high-speed CW, and all the rest of it from there, which is all now evolved into FT-8, which is where it's all from. And as I say, that was all back in version 3.8.1, which was probably around about, as I say, 2001. Anyway, that's just a bit for me. So let's do the overview of what FT-8 is. So FT-8 as a name stands for Frank and Taylor. It's developed by Steve Frank, K9AN, and Joe Taylor, K1JT. Originally, it was Joe Taylor used to do all the development within WSJT type stuff, but when it came to the newer modes, so some other people got involved. As I mentioned, MGM modes is a funny one. When you talk about it, both are kind of used. And it's a weak signal mode. It's not a low power mode. And I want to clear that up. You're quite fine to run a kilowatt on FT-8. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Obviously, a lot of people like to run at low power because it is good for low power, but it's not a mode like Whisper. Whisper was sort of expected to be running as low power as you can. FT-8 is not that. So run as much power as you want with FT-8. The QSOs are made through a set procedure, so there's only a very limited set of messages you exchange, which makes it good. That's where you get your performance from, but it's limited. Some people like to chat, of course, and you don't really get that so much with FT-8. So it's not really a chat mode, although you can send 13 characters of free text, which is useful at times. JS8 call, which is the last point on this slide, was developed around that. Originally, it was FT-8 call, and then the developers, Joe and Steve, got really annoyed with Jordan, KN4CRD from memory, who developed FT-8 call, and got really annoyed because they'd taken this, it's a GPL licensed software. So technically, as long as you kind of tell everyone where you got the source code from. You can do what you want with it. But when he did that, the guys that originally envisaged FT-8 to be this mode, how it's been used by the majority of people, they didn't like this development of having it turned into a chat type mode. Anyway, so since then, I won't go into too much detail about GS8 call, but Jordan changed the protocol so it doesn't use the 8 FSK modulation anymore. It uses his own slight variant and has been renamed to GS8 call, but it's quite fun, actually. It's a bit like Packet. I suppose GS8 call, for those that have ever done Packet and chat over Packet, I guess that's what it's like, but with FT8. So that's the kind of the background to where it came out. I've got the dates actually in here. Actually, sorry, 2 seconds. Let me get this one. I do have it somewhere. FT8 was, I think from memory, it was the 12th of June 2017. Yeah, I've got it further on actually, was when it came onto the scene. Some of the big points of why FT8's used or why I use it really, as much as anything, is I can be multitasking in the shack. So for example, I could be having this conversation and actually on another screen, it's difficult to show you, but I've got 4 monitors in here. I could be having one monitor doing FT8 right now while I'm QSOs, while I'm chatting to you guys. And I do a lot of bodging and such like over on that desk. So I like FT8 because I can be having QSOs while I'm bodging on the desk and just come back to the PC every few minutes. I also like to run multiple bands in parallel. As I say, I've got multiple monitors, so each monitor's effectively got a radio and a band connected to it. It's much easier, data modes in general actually, but FT8 as well. It's much easier to do remote control when you're not having to pass audio over the remote link. Any sort of remote desktop software, TeamViewer, VNC or whatever, as long as you've got control of the computer screen, then you can do remote control for FT8 pretty simply. For some of the bands, again, this is the sort of the VHF sort of things, and I suppose 10 meters even a bit is that as well, is it concentrates activity into smaller areas. People might go, oh, but that means what's the rest? Why do we need all the rest of the bandwidth? I'm not going to get into that conversation, but it does mean like on 2 meters, rather than having it like an SDR pan adapter running or something like that, you can sort of listen on one frequency and you kind of get all the activity on that one frequency. So it's quite useful for that point of view. And some of the things FT8, the points at the bottom here, that is achieved or allowed to happen is 2 meter and 70 SEMS transatlantic QSOs. Wasn't possible. They were never achieved before FT8 came round. And over December, the new year just passed, there was a huge tropo opening. Unfortunately, I was indisposed in hospital at the time. But GM3 SEK, who's in Dumfries in Scotland, managed to work D41 CV at 4,500 kilometers. And actually one of my friends, Paul, MM3DDQ, who's just to the northwest of Glasgow, worked D41 CV as well. And Paul only uses a 4-element beam, an FT-857. So it's at 50 watts max, but he's 10 watts out, 213. His area was literally bolted on the side of the house, no rotator or anything. And he managed that, so it's probably nearer 4,800K, 4,700K on 10 watts. So again, on the VHF point of view, it kind of speaks for itself. As I mentioned, FT-8 was released July 11th, I was day out. And this is the output from club log. So these lines show how many club log entries per mode were inputted, and the green line is the one of interest of FT8. And you can see in the middle of the year, it just pretty much overtook everything within the space of 2 months, really. Again, I'm not going to get into the discussions of the good and the bad of that. Obviously, everyone has their opinion, but let's all assume it's good. So it's a mode that's here to stay. And one of the reasons it's going to stay is the performance you get from it. As I mentioned before, I think of the performance gain or the performance in terms of gain, where I consider it in sort of dB. So I've put together some slides. One's a bit fanciful. You'll see in the next slide or two, where I make some very big assumptions, but I think I'll get my point across. But ultimately, because of the reduced bandwidth of FT8, the gain over, say, SSB at 2,400 or 2.4 kilohertz is quite a big number. You're nearly 17 dBs of improvement. And over CW, you're talking at least sort of 7 dB of improvement. I won't go into the details of this, but I hope for those that know how to calculate gain figures, that's how it's sort of down here, it's sort of backed up from all that. But ultimately, you end up, if we just take it from SSB, let's just round it out to 17 dB of improvement over SSB. I did prove this. This is a quick setup with a screen bag and a bunch of attenuators. You can see the sort of setup along the bottom of the screen where I tested the various things. Now, this is where I'm hoping the audio is going to run. So again, Brian, if you just give me the thumbs up that this all plays. So what I done for this test is I had a voice keyer and I set the SSB voice keyer going to the point where I thought the report was about a 4 and 0. So if anything weaker, you wouldn't get it. So let me hopefully see if this plays. So as I say, that was sent from a voice keyer through that setup, which was into the 817 on the left, and it was recorded from the 910 on the right. So that's what the SSB level was like. For the same attenuation level, this is what CW sounded like. One thing I should point out, I don't think I put it on the slide here, that actually I was only ever recording at 2.8 kilohertz. So although that's CW, that was in the SSB bandwidth. So again, with the same power level, with the same attenuation level, you'll hear a bit of FT-8 and then afterwards you'll hear the SSB. And what you've got to remember is what you hear here is that the FT-8 signal was decoded such that there was still 20 dB of overhead available. So I could put 20 dB more attenuation in and I would still have decoded the FT-8 signal. So you can hear the difference between the FT-8 signal, which on a playback isn't really much, but just know that there was still 20 dB of attenuation I could still add, and that would have still decoded. And as you could hear, the SSB was sort of marginal. So the way I look at this, is the point I sort of made before, and I reiterate here, is I think of this as I have got 20 dB more gain on FT-8 than I would on SSB. And if I was to look at that in terms of distance or antennas, the only way I can make up sort of those sort of gains, so if I wanted to work someone on SSB to the same signal strength as I could work them on FT-8, I would have to go for a four square bayed element, stacked in bayed 9 elements would get me close. Or, as in the power table here on the right, instead of using 10 watts, I'd need to use nearly 500 watts. So that's the sort of improvement that FT-8 gives. So just by using the narrower band mode, you get these improvements. So instead of going out and putting a massive antenna up, by changing mode, you get the same improvement effectively. If we look at this in an inverse square law, and this is where I get a bit fanciful, so forgive me on this. It doesn't quite hold true, but let's just, for a tabletop thought exercise, if you double your range in terms of RF, inverse square law means you quarter your power. So that you're talking 6 dB here. So if you go out, and we're talking sort of 16, 17 dBs, so we're well within 12 dB. So this is where I took the number of UK hams, which I calculated out based on the square kilometers of the UK. I worked out to be in 0.33 hams per square kilometer in the UK. So if you then double your distance, so if you add 6 dB to your signal, however you do that by putting an antenna gain up, transmit power, or as I say, by changing mode, you can quadruple your distance, etc., all the rest up. And instead of being able to talk to, as I calculate here, at sort of 250k, 64,000 or 65,000 hams, by going up by 12 dB, you're talking theoretically over 1 million hams that you're covering, which is quite a number. As I say, it's a bit of a tabletop exercise, but hopefully you get a different point of view on how to look at signal improvement over just saying, yeah, I've got more power. What does that actually mean in reality? And this is what it means in terms of this. As I say, that it's a bit more focused on VHF. If we're talking HF here, these sort of ranges aren't quite the same, but you get the same sort of improvement by either reducing your power or etc., etc. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. If not, ask me questions at the end. But that's how I look at these sort of things over anything else. To try and keep it short, I'm just going to quickly touch on WSJTX software. There's 3 softwares you could use. There's WSJTX, JTDX, which is a variant of, and MSHV. They're all as good as each other. Everyone has their preference. I'll stick with WSJTX just because that's what Joe Taylor released. And it's certainly the most popular when it comes to doing FT-8. It's got 2 windows. You've got a waterfall and a main one. It's a bit clunky for that reason. MSHV is a single window, which if you're using a small laptop is actually better, I find. But anyway, it's a point I might want to point out. You get rig control with WSJTX, so that once you've got everything running, you don't have to touch the radio. And again, this is what's useful for remote operating as well. So if you want to change band, everything just happens. You don't have to worry about it. Decoded stations can be colorized, so you can see by the color which stations you might want to work. It's sort of a highlight way. You can export all your QSOs to ADIF, so you can upload to Logbook of the World, QRZ, whichever you like to do. Supports interfacing to third-party apps and a bunch of other things. You can run multiple instances, as I mentioned before as well, and I can sort of talk you through. There's a couple of ways to do that. This is what the interface looks like. There's actually 2 windows here. I've sort of combined them. There's a waterfall at the top, and then there's a decode window at the bottom. So there's a bunch of arrows there just showing you what's what. I'll do a live QSO if people want to do it at the end, because I can share the screen and show you all that. But basically, if you've downloaded the slides, you've got this to go back and refer to. I won't go into too much detail. There's not a huge amount worth sort of giving you the details on there at the moment. It's all quite self-explanatory. However, I will go through some pitfalls that's worth letting you know about. Again, use these slides if you're going to set it up at home. So some of the settings I recommend you do is to run in split operating. I've got a real bugbear with this, to be honest. If you don't run with split, you've got a real chance of causing issues with interference. The waterfall on the right, you can see the main signal. I was going to say I wouldn't tell you who the call sign is, but actually it's written right there in the waterfall. Well, won't go into that. And at 2 times his frequency, or sorry, you can see it mixing that you've got these harmonics. And if you run split, it solves a lot of these interference issues. I've spent quite a bit of time emailing VHF-wise stations to tell them to enable this. And once they do it, it makes big improvements. The other good thing with FT-8, I'm sure lots of you use it, is PSK Reporter to see the activity. Actually, DX Maps as well now supports integration, but basically everything you decode gets automatically spotted to PSK Reporter. So from there you can draw maps and see who you're hearing or who's hearing you. I've got a bunch of shortcuts set up so that I can quickly look at each band and see which bands are active, and it's all because of this little tick box here. So again, these are just things I would recommend you enable. Your operator call into the settings box to the top right, certainly if you're going to be doing multiple bands of different locations, because that tags each or adds the operator call in the ADIF log. And if you're going to operate stroke portable, stroke mobile, or GM or MM or whatever, then it's worth knowing which call sign was for each QSO and all the rest of it. You can add your antenna details as part of the upload to PSK reporter, the bottom two sort of images in the bottom right, sort of, it's useful to know, because if someone hears me and I click on them, that's useful for me to know what antenna they're using. So if someone's using a big beam versus a dipole, there's a good chance I'll be able to work them or not, as the case may be. So I would strongly recommend anyone that's using this adds the details in there. You just right click in that box and just do insert and type in your details. Coloring, as I mentioned before, so you can see who you're trying to work. If you're trying to work DXCC on each band, you can colorize it as you want. Again, right click, you can change the colors and all the rest of it. You might not want to use colors, but it can be really useful. Certainly if you're trying to, I know people that are only interested in working stations, they've not worked before, and they base all that on the colors. So again, that's there for you to look at. The big one with regards to FT-8, and I suppose any digital mode, obviously, is the transmit level. And within WSJTX, there's sort of 4 ways you can adjust your transmit audio level. One is using the Windows or the Linux OS sound recorder level. There's one in the software GUI. So in WSJTX, there's a slider called Power, which effectively is audio level. Most data interfaces have a hardware control for transmit audio level, and most radios now, certainly if they've got a USB interface, have an adjustment within the software to get the levels right. It's quite important that you get all these levels right. The general rule of thumb to set it up right is you set the software levels such that when you adjust in the WSJT power slider, as soon as you start to reduce that, the power output from your radio starts to reduce as well. So the 2 software ones, which is your computer sound card and your WSJTX software one, you adjust them basically so that the point where that power slider is at the highest point, where as soon as you start to reduce it, your power reduces as well. That's the general rule of thumb. So anyone that's doing FT-8 or doing any of these sort of modes, that's my recommendation, the simple way of setting all that up. The QSO procedure for those that do FT-8 a lot, this will be sucking eggs, unfortunately, but for those who haven't, it's a very simple way to do QSO procedures. In terms of starting off with a QSO, there's 2 ways you can do it. Obviously, you can call CQ, or you can search and pounce. Both are very similar. With CQing, well, both of them actually, I didn't show you the thing here, sorry. Let me just go back to, there's a tick box, which is really important on the main one here. Hopefully you can see there's a whole TX frequency here just below this decode button. Always run with that box ticked. And the way you always start any QSO is you find a clear frequency in the waterfall, right click on it, and then do set your TX, your RX and TX offset. All you're caring about there is your TX offset. You always want to transmit on the same frequency. You don't want your transmit to move every time you have a QSO. Find a clear frequency, set it, tick that box so you don't change frequency again. And that's the same whether you're calling stations or whether you're calling CQ. If you're calling CQ, you just tick TX6 box and then hit enable TX, and then the system pretty much goes away and it makes QSOs. You have to restart every QSO. You have to start it again, which is quite good actually, because I think if Joe Taylor and that lot fully automated FT-8 to the point where you could literally sit back and do nothing, it would be a bit too much. There's also a lot, most people that don't like FT-8 don't like it because it's sort of automated at the moment. But at the moment it has to be, because you get 15-second transmit and receive periods. The actual transmit is 12.6 seconds. So you end up with about 2.5 seconds to decide who to answer. And most people, when you're decoding 10, 20 stations, you don't have time to do that. So you have to sort of automate that aspect of it. If you're searching and pouncing, you just look for the call sign that's called, or the station that's called CQ, double click on the call sign, and it just works. The automation just deals with it. This is the same. This slide's probably a bit too much. I left it in, but it was more for the MGM, which was the original presentation for this. But what it basically shows is you've got your messages, you've got 6 messages. You only ever have to send 3 of them to complete your QSO. and you always send the next message from the one you receive. So if you transmitted with TX1, then you would receive back TX2, and then you would send TX3, they would send TX4, and you would send TX5, and your QSO is complete. This is explaining this makes more sense for other modes. FT-8, because it's automated, as I say, it's sort of just explaining what the automation does. Doesn't sound quite as important as it does with sort of MSK or FSK modes, which the presentation was originally built around. So the auto sequence takes care of all this, and basically, if for whatever reason you do not get a decode, then just make sure you don't don't accidentally go to the next message and go out of sequence, because the QSO is technically invalid if you do. But this you'll pick up by operating. This is just the kind of the close-up of who sends what. GB3HQ sends these messages, and I would send these messages, and this is effectively what WSJTX would look like after a completed QSO, just so people can see. The red lines are the ones that I transmit, and you can see the colors. The GB3HQ hadn't been worked at this point, so that's a different color. Yellow is what I transmit, sorry, and the red is what I receive. Get it around the right way. Yeah, I'm not going to go into this one in too much detail, but you can run WSJT, as I mentioned before, multiple instances. This is the last slide, by the way, so I'll go to questions in a minute. You can run it in two ways. If you've got two radios and one monitor or one computer, you can use the configuration option, and it will save the COM port, the sound card settings, etc. for each radio. If you have the opportunity to have two radios connected in parallel, you can run two instances of WSJTX. I suppose you could have a QSO yourself if you really wanted to, but ultimately you can run two bands at once. I like it on VHF because I've got three radios, so I can run 10, 6, and 2, or 10, 4, and 2, or 6, 4, and 2, or whatever combinations. Which on the VHF bands, when it can be quite slow, multiple bands actually makes it a little bit more exciting. That's not saying it's not exciting, but it just makes it a bit more exciting. As I say, that's pretty much the end of the slides. So apologies if this wasn't the best presentation in the world. So it was sort of thrown together at the last minute to hopefully give an introduction to FT-8. But I think, as I say, I can do a demo, but I'll throw it to Brian first for comments and maybe questions, and then take it from there.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Gavin. That's much appreciated. I don't know about everybody else, but I learned quite a lot from that session. I've got one question from myself, but first of all, I'll just offer the opportunity for other people to ask questions. I'm going to try something here. I don't know if it'll work, but there is a way of essentially raising your hand in Zoom, which is to type the characters Alt and Y Yankee. So it's the Alt key and the Y key together. And if you press those, then hopefully that will raise your hand on the participants list, and I'll be able to call you in. The idea being that we don't all pile in at once. So does anybody want to give that a go?
Right, I've just typed Alt and Y from me, but it might not work for me because I'm sharing the screen.
Yeah, it's working for you. Come on, somebody be brave and ask a question. I want to know if this technology works.
Got one from Stephen, I think.
Why can't I see it?
Stephen's mini pad, you got him?
Steve, yeah, it's not. That's interesting because I'm not seeing that. Anyway,
He's only got his physical hand up.
Oh, I see. Up, so, a physical hand up, not a virtual hand up.
Using an iPad, he might not be able to.
Steve, go ahead.
Where do I enter some of the people calling CQ tell you their country? Where do I put that in so that people can see when I'm calling them that I'm the UK or England or whatever?
Okay, so I'll tell you what, let me just throw up an instance of WSJT. I might have to just change my screen sharing. Just give me a second, because...
And the other question is the difference between going RR or R73. It's sort of...
Yes, I can answer you both of them. Can you see the WSJT instance on that screen?
Yes.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. Let me just decode. So the country name that you're seeing here, so Germany, Italy, etc., that's automatically entered based on the decode. Now, it's only... These are only stations who are calling CQ, if you notice, are the ones calling the country. Yeah. So you don't actually have to type in, let's take this German station here for an example. That Germany is created within my local instance of the software.
But if I call CQ, it doesn't show me my country, but you think it's showing other people my country.
Yeah, so if you called CQ at the remote end, people who are decoding your CQ, the country England will come up.
Oh, right.
Because it basically looks at your call sign, your prefix, and adds it locally. So you don't actually transmit England. You don't send that word or characters. You just send your call sign, and the WSJT software at the other end decodes it and says, oh, that station's from England, so I'll tag it with England. Now you can, under settings, I'll show you, this might be another point as well, is under here, here you've got an option called show principal prefix instead of country name. So if I tick that, let me just clear that off and let the next, it depends on how you've got yours configured. I think by default it's not. So if you can see now, it's only showing me the DXCC prefix now instead of the country. In fact, let me do it easier. Let me just show you CQ onlys. So I've filtered to only show me the CQs. So you can see here, it's just shown me the DXCC prefix. If I change the setting, show principal prefix, and disable that, so it should now show me the country name. When I decode that, it now gives me the country name instead of the DXCC prefix. But say that, like Slovenia, EU, Russia, that's not been transmitted by the remote station. That's been generated locally in my software. It looks at the station who's calling CQ and tells me which country they're in, basically. And sorry, the other question you had was the RR and 7.3s. So, as I mentioned before, in the QSO procedures, you always send the next message. So if I sent you TX1, you would reply to me with TX2. I would send you TX3. When it comes down to here, now originally, let me see, if I double click on TX4, it changes it. If you watch, it says RRR at the moment, and I've changed it, and it goes to RRR73. So in the old days, before FT-8, when QSOs were very long, and people didn't mind that because that was just what we had, people would always send RRRs, and that's your Roger, I've got your report. And at that point, technically the QSO was complete, but the only way you would know that was either on a chat page to say, I've got your RRRs, or I send you 7.3s and you receive my 7.3s. When people started doing FT-8 and realized that actually that was an extra 15 seconds on a QSO, you know, it doesn't seem like much, but actually when your QSO, you know, it can take up to almost a quarter or a fifth of your QSO. The abbreviated this Roger, I've received your report, to RRR73, which basically means Roger, 7.3s in one go. So rather than having to send an additional message, you basically it just removes one message required to be sent, which just speeds everything up by, let's say, 20% or thereabouts, the QSO. So if you happened on, it could happen by accident, if yours says RRR on this, if you double click on this TX4 button, you'll see it changes between RRR and RR73. And RR73 is the the generally accepted format nowadays. If you went back 2 years ago, people would expect RRRs, then another 7.3 message additionally to that, but they realized they could shorten it. So hopefully that answers that one as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Any more questions from anybody else? You can either wave your hand, but I might not see you because I can't see everybody's pictures on the screen, or you can do the Alt and Y thing if you have a question for Gavin.
As you might have seen, sorry, I just double clicked on this Oscar Hotel station. So hopefully I'll have a QSO with, and you'll see a QSO in reality. No, he didn't hear me. If he's QRP, he should hear me. I won't tell you what power the quadro's running.
Okay, there's a question from Richard. Richard, go ahead.
Sorry, Richard, not hearing you.
Richard, you're not hearing me.
You're unmuted, but I don't think you've got the mic configured right, or it's muted.
Is that any better?
Yeah,
yes. Yeah, I hear you now, Richard.
Sorry, I picked up the wrong mic.
Hey, we've all done that.
Okay, so I'm looking at the screen at the moment, and it looks pretty full of signals. There's a gap at about, I can't quite see the top, 1,000 and a bit.
Yeah, that's where I've just put my transmit at, yeah.
Right. Okay, so I was going to say, well, when you see a screen like that, where were you going to pick? And did you want to make a comment about? So I've heard this bit about you don't want to go at the lower end of your audio bandwidth. You want to be at the higher end so that you're not producing harmonics. So I presume.
Yes and no. So there's 2 points to that, which is actually, you've raised a good point. So first off, what I've done here is I've left it running for a few times, and you can see there is a gap sort of here. So I've right-clicked. I'm in the middle of, sorry, I'm having a QSO. He's now decided to answer me this Oscar Hotel. Fair enough. So if I went up to here and right-click, I get this option to set my RX and TX. Now, you're quite in your right. If I look, let's take over here, just about 2,100. It's not the case now, but you could see there was a gap every other period. So I could transmit in these gaps, and that would be acceptable as well.
Yeah.
So you don't need to have a full clear waterfall as long as you transmit in there. So you find your appropriate transmit frequency and period, and you click, as I say, this whole TX. In terms of where you transmit in audio, if you've got cat control going, then it's not such a problem. And this was the point I raised before about split. So if you go to your radio option and under split, okay, excellent, we've just worked him. Okay, it's because of that's on as well. Sorry. So under here, you've got split operation. I use fake it. Some people use rig, which actually puts the radio into split. Fake it just changes the frequency on the same VFO. And what actually happens is, let's try and keep this. So the problem you have is because of the way frequency shift keying is generated in a sound card, and certainly if you overdrive the sound card, you can generate harmonics. So if I was transmitting where I am now, let's just round it to 1,000. Excuse me. Let's just say I'm transmitting on 1,000 hertz, 1 kilohertz. So in terms of carrier frequency, my radio is tuned to 7.074. If I transmit with a 1 kilohertz audio tone, my actual RF is on 7.075. Yeah?
Yeah, with that.
However, so my second harmonic of 1 kilohertz is at 2 kilohertz. Now, most radios, you're using a bandwidth of around about 2.5 kilohertz, your radio transmit bandwidth. What you want to try and do is put your transmit audio above half of that. So if, I'm trying to think how best to explain it. My second harmonic is below the pass band. So as long as I transmit above my second harmonics above 2.5 kilohertz, my transmitter will not send that second harmonic. So you null that issue ultimately. So you always want your audio frequency to be above at least, I'll just say 1,300 hertz. Now 500 hertz audio, with that split operation, when I go to transmit, what happens is the radio will tune down a kilohertz, and the software, instead of sending 500 hertz, will send 1,500 hertz audio. Now that still means my audio, my RF carrier is at 7.075 or thereabouts, but it just means that the second audio harmonic is above 2,500 hertz and therefore is filtered by the radio's transmit passband filter.
Okay, Gavin, I think I followed that.
Yeah.
But would that be if you use the split with the rig? Does it still do the same if you use the fake it?
Yes, so I only ever use fake it. I'm trying to think if I can draw this in a bit better way.
But with fake it, it's not. I thought it didn't control the VFO. I thought it just did it within the audio band.
So, sorry, I think this might. I'm hoping this will work. Sorry, if anyone gets seasick. Hopefully I didn't just pull my web camera out. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so you can see the frequency 7074. Might not be. In fact, let me. There we go. Let's make it a little bit bigger.
That's in focus.
Yeah. So take the top frequency here. So if on my software I transmit, I'm going to just set it to 500 hertz.
Okay.
Or thereabouts. When I transmit, you can see the frequency jumps down to 725. I'll just stop transmitting, it comes back. So what happens is, although I've set the software up to be at sort of 500 hertz, the radio drops down 1.5 kilohertz. So
the audio can be at higher frequency.
Audio, yeah, the audio out of the sound card, although I've told it to be 500, actually becomes 1,000 or 1,500. And that's added to the frequency to still give you the 7.0745 from an RF point of view.
Okay, so
if I didn't run split and I just transmitted a 500 hertz tone at the moment, and I had a frequency counter, it would show 7074.5. Yeah. And sorry, I'm saying this so others can hear it as well.
Okay, so that makes sense to me if you're using the rig as with the cat control. But is it doing it when you clicked your fake it bit?
Yes. So I'm currently using fake it as the split mode.
Ah, right. So that's what I didn't understand, because that means it's clearly still doing cat control for the rig.
Yes. So what would happen? This is the difference if you watch. So I've just told it to run rig split. Now, do you notice how the splits come up on the rig? It's that red bit there.
Ah, right. Yeah, I'm with you.
So it's now using the split on the rig. So if I transmit, sorry, it's going to transmit in just a moment. Okay, no, it's not. Let me switch that to the other one.
So you're then using two VFOs.
Correct. Whereas
right. So that's something I hadn't understood, because when I sometimes do FT-8, not very often, but what I sometimes do is I'm using the CDARC remote setup.
Yeah.
And I'm using a virtual audio cable between the FT-8 software and the remote software, which means I've got no direct cat control to the rig. So I do the PTT of the rig by switching the rig onto Vox, and it just goes to transmit when anything. So I've always used fake it on the assumption that it was only doing it within the audio band.
No, so now in fairness, I think the 857s don't work very well with the fake it option, then you have to sort of run split. So just check the behavior of your radio that you have. All the radios I've got here, so that's the Pro 3 that you've just seen, Icon Pro 3, the 7300, the 910, they all run fake it and they all run fine.
Okay, so, yeah, I can't.
These are icons. so I can't comment about other manufacturers.
But with the remote setup, we've not got cat. Oh no, I suppose we do have.
If you have no cat control whatsoever,
Yeah.
then you're probably right with your original point that you want to try and always use a frequency above 1,500 hertz to be safe.
Fine, I'm with you, because I'm certainly hoping to start doing FT-8 on 2 meters in the not too distant future, and with that rig at the moment, I've got no cat control.
Yeah, I mean, apologies. Let me just find where everything's just gone. If I go to, apologies for diversifying everything here. Let's see where all this opens up. Sorry, I've got too many monitors as I say. These, let's find one that's quite easy. So here's an example here of someone transmitting around about 900 hertz. And then you can see the first harmonic, and actually you can start seeing part of the second harmonic. Yeah. Now, some of this might be a bit of mixing as well, but there's no one else here. Now, this signal here is just terrible because you can actually see about 100 hertz up. I think that switch mode power supply noise, as much as anything, is just to the right, you know, just above 1,000 there.
You can see it's just LF as well, can't you?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, actually highlight it as well, so you can actually see it all the way down here. So that's a really bad signal. Here's another example here where you can sort of see a bit of a spreading at this point and more spread, and you can tell it's spreading because it doubles the size as you go up. And this is completely down to overdriving audio. Now, some of this could be mixing in my sound card as well. That's aircraft scatter. There's another really bad signal. Well, overdriving. This was the one I actually put into Radcom, but there's certainly some sound card mixing going on in here as well. But this was 3 stations, I think, actually, using 2 meters. And these were all the signals that were ended up being generated because of overdriving.
What fun.
So yeah, so that's not the point is here. If you're going to do FT-8, the very simple thing to do is to enable this fake it. If you tick that box there, you've pretty much will remove all that problem from your transmit, most of it anyway. And if you can't, if your radio doesn't support that, then transmit above 1,500 hertz, preferably. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. I mean, actually looking here, this is 40 meters. It's actually looking quite clean tonight in terms of signals. I run mine with a little bit much brightness, so if I turn the brightness down, you can actually see that most of them signals, although some are strong, they look reasonably okay. There's not much. I don't think there's many bad signals in there at all. Maybe one up here, the very top end, but that's about it.
Gavin, Steve G, I had problems using Fake It in that every time it tried to change the frequency, it kept going down further. It wasn't switching it back up again. So I have to run in rig.
Okay, so when it transmits, it drops a kilohertz, but never comes back. Okay, and which radio are you using? Well,
I may have had the settings wrong because I think it was the same radio, an FT-450. I see.
Okay, I certainly from memory, the 857 Yaesu has to be running split rather than Fake It for very similar issues. Split. Yeah, and I think it's the same in the 857. If you run it with split, it's okay. If you run it in Fake It, it does exactly what you say. It drops a kilohertz, but it doesn't come back. Now, some of the issues that could cause that, but you would normally see an error, is there's a lot of data interfaces are very poorly immune to RF. So what happens is the software goes down, tells it to change frequency, RF then gets into the mix and it loses connection to the radio, but you would get an error message at that point. And if you're not seeing an error message, it's not RF. So yeah, as I say, some radios will not work with Fake It, and therefore use split as you found. And I think that's why both options are available, because the developers know that there are some models that don't like fake it. As I say, the ICOMs I'm using are fine, and from memory, when I've done the D expeditions with the K3, I've also used fake it, and I've had no trouble. But I don't own a Yaesu. Well, actually, I've an 857 and an 817 somewhere, but I don't use them in anger. But yeah, so in that case, just try both, and whichever one works for you, use it.
The other thing, if people aren't too bored by me, that I've found the hard way is I had to switch the metering to something called ALC, automatic level control, to be able to turn the sound driving down to the point where it wasn't doing this nasty harmonics spreading, overdriving things. And until I'd worked out what this ALC meant and how you could set it for yourself, I was one of these criminals.
ALC is a funny one because people will probably try and correct me on this, but ALC is more for it's more to tell you how badly the PAs are finding the match of the antenna. Now that can be overdriving the front end of the PAs as much as having a bad SWR, but you could have a really good SWR and overdrive it and have no ALC. Like otherwise, you could have a really bad SWR and underdrive it and still have a high ALC. So assuming you've got a matched antenna, what you want to do is see this slider here on the right, this one called power. You want to adjust all the other controls that as soon as you drop this down even a smidgen, the transmit power starts to drop. So let's not bother with ALC meters at the moment. Let's look at a power meter on the output of the radio, say. You have got all your levels correct when at whatever point you reduce this and you start. Now, what you can do as well is you can reduce this power one to maybe there, and then that's when you start to see the transmit power drop, in which case you leave that power slider there. That's the general rule of thumb that most in the community advise people to do. What you've done with the ALC is just as good, but in the general rule of thumb for anyone who's setting up WSJT, to know the level is correct is as soon as you start to reduce this slider, if the power reduces at the exact same time, then your levels are right, irrespective of what ALCs show or anything else. So always run for as little ALC as you want, but that's more of an indicator of how the MOSFETs, let's just say, well, there could be transistors, I suppose, as well, but your finals are being driven into a given load. So they can show a different reading depending on a few other things, but I think what you've done, Stephen, is fine. By the sounds of it,
I checked it out using a sampler and an RSP1A SDR, and it really, the signal looked a lot cleaner when I discovered this problem and did the things with altered all the various levels, so the ALC wasn't really kicking in. There was a suggestion that you should only just see the first little click of the ALC, not halfway up the screen as it had been before.
It depends on how you're doing it. So as I say, sorry, you're right in what you say, but my general advice to everyone is even if the ALC is bad, as long as when you reduce this power slider, as long as the transmit power starts to reduce with it, irrespective of what ALC shows, your generally audio levels are set up right. Because if you've got a badly matched antenna, your ALC will be bad as well, regardless of what audio level you're driving the radio at.
Okay.
Because ALC is a slight function of SWR as well, is probably what I'm trying to say.
Right. If I can just stop that one now.
It's a mixture of
had Mike waiting for a long
badly you're driving the devices, how much the power's been rolled back. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, there's some echoing going on there. So that Mike's been waiting a long time with a question. I say that, in fact, he's actually disappeared off the screen now. Mike, are you still with us? Oh dear. I think his internet must have given up the ghost or something. Yeah. He'd been waiting patiently for a while. Sorry for interjecting there.
No, it's
Right.
fine.
Any more questions from anybody else? I'm going to unmute everybody now. So if anybody else has got any more questions or comments for Gavin, please pile in. Steve Blunt.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep, fine.
Yes.
Okay. You've taken the screen off now. When you go to generate the messages, you use tab 1. I, out of habit, have always used tab 2. But in a discussion the other day, that's it, somebody said, what's the tab 3? What's all that stuff in there? And I thought, oh, I've never even looked at that. Never used tab 3.
Oh, yeah, so these ones here.
Yeah, I use tab 2 normally.
Yeah, so this it's exactly the same as what's obviously in tab 1. It's just formatted slightly different.
Yes, yes.
So as I mentioned before, you always send an X1. This is just formatting it there.
Yeah.
Tab 3 from memory. I'm not sure it will let me do it. No, I'm not getting it at the moment. Might not let me, depending on. No.
Is there anything there useful?
It's to do, I think, with all your echoing with, this is an EMI tab, basically. And it's with shorthand. I used it a long time ago.
Is it relevant to
No.
FT-8, or is it
No, it's not relevant to FT-8. So tab 1 and 2, sorry, let me get rid of that. Do the exact same thing. Where I mentioned before, whether you're calling CQ or you're searching and pouncing, i.e. answering people calling CQ.
Yeah.
So if you're calling CQ, you just do that, then that, then that.
I just prefer using that one.
Yeah, and people do. I think I prefer tab 1 because I started with meteor scatter in the old days, and everything was like tab 1 in terms of formatting.
Yeah.
Tab 2 was basically a copy from JT HF. I think were the first to sort of format messaging when they were doing JT65 on HF. I think that software came up with this formatting to make it simple and much easier for everyone. And you're right, it probably would be, for a newbie, maybe tab 2 is the easiest actually to use. I would maybe say actually. So that's a good point.
Column 2,
yeah. Yeah, good point. Of course, if you were just answering someone, so let's take this station here, you just double click on it, and as you can see, it all automatically does it.
Yeah.
So you almost don't need to touch any of these if you're searching and pouncing. You just double click on the call sign, and it will do the rest. Assuming you have the auto sequence ticked.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Mike's back with us. So, Mike, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, are you getting me okay?
Yeah, fine. You dropped off for a little while, but then came back.
Right, yeah, I've got internet problems. Yeah, I say the internet's been dropping out for the last few days. You might have answered my question when I've forgotten who it was, talking about faking it. When I use my Kenwood, I use WSJT in fake it mode, works fine. When I'm using the FT-817, I have OmniRig running with log4 OM and JT alert. All works fine, except if I use fake it just on and off on TX. So I use the rig setting, and that seems to work fine. So when you mean on off?
Sorry, sorry, just elaborate on what you meant by on and off TX.
When I enable TX recall, it will just literally pulse TX on, off, on, off, on, off. Toggles.
Okay. Sounds like it's trying to read the radio. I guess I reckon so the issue before was with an FT-450, another Yaesu. So I think there's possibly an issue with cat control in Yaesus.
Yeah.
In which case, that to me, I wouldn't call it a bug. Let's just call it behavior, undesired behavior. And if split works, just use split. There's no difference ultimately to the end usability. You know, one doesn't have an advantage over the other in terms of operating. Just use whichever one works for you. And
I was just wondering whether I had something wrong in the login program. It works fine in fake it mode. It's only when I've got OmniRig running.
So what you probably so the way it works, when you've got fake it going, what happens is WSJTX, before it hits the transmit, commands the radio to change frequency. Let's just say down a kilohertz. It will then try and read the frequency back to make sure it's actually moved frequency before it transmits. If you've got 2 or 3 programs talking to OmniRig, what you're probably finding is that log 4M is going, I didn't ask you to read me the frequency, what's going on? And it's sending other data to OmniRig and everything's sort of colliding. And basically WSJTX gets a bit confused. If I use a piece of software, sorry, let me just, it's come up the other screen, yeah. So here I take physical COM ports and turn them into virtual COM ports. So like what you're doing, I can have multiple bits of software talking to a physical COM port. Now, because of that, if I sit and tune too quickly, at some point there, I'll get this read error. And that's because WSJTX can't read the frequency from the radio. And that only happens when I use this intermediary software. And that's almost what OmniRig is. It's a sort of a man in the middle bit of software. And I just think WSJTX doesn't play, or it's trying to do something that other programs don't like, and they just all collide, and that's what's happening. When it uses split, the difference is, so as I say, when you use fake it goes to transmit. It will first tell the radio to go down, let's just say a kilohertz. It will then read the frequency back from the radio to confirm it's gone down a kilohertz, and then enable the transmit. When it does split mode, it just tells the radio to do split, and that's it. It doesn't have to tell it to do anything again in terms of cat control, because as far as it knows, split's on, and it just has to go into transmit, and the radio would automatically change to the right frequency. Do you get the difference? I'm guessing the internet stopped because everything mic's gone a bit still.
Did you catch the end of that, Mike? Yeah, he's still there, but I suspect he's got a bit of an internet reception.
Yeah, so I guess just in generic for anyone that might still be confused. So when you use the split mode, WSJTX, when you tell it to use split, at that point it will tell them, or when you fire up WSJTX or change band, it will command the radio to run split, and it will do it once. And then all it does after that is enables the transmit. When you run fake it sort of talks to the radio every time it goes into transmit. And if you've got too many other programs, an OmniRig, as people might know, it's like a man in the middle piece of software that allows a physical COM port or a radio to be shared to multiple programs. If you've got too many programs trying to read the cat or the frequency or whatever, and they collide, and it doesn't play fairly. And I guess that's what's going on in this case. So again, if you've got issues with RF and all these things, then that's where the split will work, where fake it might not.
Okay, thanks for that, Gavin. Appreciate that. David T's got a question. David, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi Gavin. I was curious about the tab 3, so I've just been to have a quick look at that. It turns out it's the DX station interface for Fox and Hound mode.
Yes, of course that's what it is.
What? Say again.
Okay, Okay, I'll just quickly go. So FT-8 is one QSO at a time. There is a feature called Fox and Hound mode, which is for de-expeditions, which allows you to, you don't run it on the normal frequencies. You can have, let's say, 10 simultaneous QSOs at once. And the tab 3 window is the GUI to control that Fox and Hound aspect. So most people will never use Fox and Hound at home. If you're doing a de-expedition or a special event call, you may only allocated FT-8 frequencies. Oh, here we go. There's some noise here. Look, somebody's overdriving the radio. This guy down here at just below 600. Thanks for that, David. That makes sense. Steve, did that make sense to you?
Yes, if I knew what Fox and Hound mode means. I've heard the term, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah, so basically if I was, say GS3 PYE was up on, let's just say there was no lockdown and we were going up to Sky next week as planned, and we were really popular, we could run we could use, I don't know, let's just say, not this frequency, we would use 7078, say, and we could then set up what's called Fox and Hound, where I could have 5 simultaneous QSOs at once.
Oh.
So I can transmit on 5 audio carriers to 5 individual stations and have 5 QSOs in parallel.
Right.
And this box down here basically will list all the stations calling me so I can get through them. So under normal operating, tab 3 is not used whatsoever.
Okay.
Fox and Hound basically just allows the big de-expeditions or the very rare DXCCs to have multiple QSOs simultaneously.
Okay, doesn't apply to me then.
No, and just so you know, you don't do that on the normal FT-8 frequencies because you just take up too much space. Mike, you dropped off before, sorry, but did you get the last meaning of the difference between the split and fake it? I think it's happened again.
No, he's there. I think he's there.
Yeah,
Mike, you still with us? Oh, obviously not.
So Steve, there's quite a lot on the web again about Fox and Hound. It's worth knowing about it because if you want to chase a rare DXCC who's using FT-8,
right,
and they are operating as the Fox, then you don't need to do any different, but it's worth understanding how it works so that you can be the Hound to chase them. But ultimately what you do is you can generate, let's just say, well, here it's say 5 individual AF carriers within your transmit passband. You can have 10, 20 even, I suppose, all sort of at different stages of QSO.
Right.
But it just means that the big de-expedition stations can obviously get through FT-8 stations far quicker if they can operate multiple stations at once.
Yeah, just as an aside, I was looking down the CQ list. It said CQEU, and I often send a CQEU and point the beam east and put a bit of decent power on there. And I still get stations from the UK coming back to me and telling me I'm plus 18 dB and things like that.
Yeah, no, it really, you can certainly tell the people who are new to FT-8, certainly on VHF, when you have like CQDX or as you say, CQEU, and someone down in JO01 answers, yeah, and you're like, yeah, not DX.
Just in the last 5 minutes, I've worked 2 Dutch on 2 meters, so there's a bit of activity on there at the moment.
Antenna's down actually, but let's have a quick.
Let's work 2 Dutch stations in a row.
Look.
Well, I've been talking, so.
Let's have a look at. Sorry, just multiple windows. They're normally in separate monitors, but Yeah, Mike's still frozen. Let's just do that. So there's left-hand side 6 meters and 2 meters on the right. Oh, don't want to do that. One other thing for people who might not have noticed it, with this waterfall, so at the moment this is 2,600 wide. If I reduce that, it won't decode anything above 2,000 because it's off this side. It's a really weird bug, because by default when you install this, it only shows, I think, 500 to 1,100. So just be aware of that.
I'll just call CQ, so at least you'll see something.
Yeah. Someone down the road, GM, PA. Anyway, yeah, so that's 2 meters. It's up there just now. And as Steve says, there's CRB, yes.
I didn't want the screen to be blank, so I sent some.
It's kind of an own goal, that, isn't it?
Haven't I worked you before? Anyway, yeah, so while I'm working, Steve, if anyone else has any other questions, I guess.
Okay, I'm assuming that's a no. Let's just see this through and then we can call the meeting to a close. Just actually, while you're there, Gavin, I was interested in your comment earlier on about basically you can use as much power as you want. I haven't done very much with FT-8, but when I first got started, all the tutorials all seemed to be about sort of just use 20 watts or something like that.
Yeah.
What is that?
I think it happened in the early days. A lot of people took FT-8 as being the sort of the QSO equivalent of Whisper. So Whisper obviously was more of a beacon type mode. And I think a lot of people just assumed that FT-8 was sort of Whisper, but with two-way capability, which it's not. As I mentioned before, it's all about dBs. And if you can, well, it depends what you want to do. Obviously, if you want to run in 1 watt with FT-8, then you can do so, and that's fine, and you'll work loads compared to SSB, of course. But if you want to run a kilowatt, if you've got an NOV to allow it, there's nothing stopping you. I mean, I generally run QRO. I'll run a few hundred watts on any band with FT-8.
I've certainly found that 10 watts gets me 500, 600 kilometers with ease.
Totally, and that's what's great about it. The point I made before again about the antennas. So I'm going to come back to this. Sorry, let me find where I've got all this now. You know, when I sort of encourage people to use the correct sort of details. Next one down, isn't it? Sorry, here. You know, which antenna you're using per band, so that if someone was to check how well you were actually receiving them at the other end, by knowing that someone's using a big antenna, you can roughly work out what the gains are. So you can tell whether your station's doing all the work or the far station, for example, because obviously gain's cumulative between the transmit and the receive. We, years ago, this is probably talking 2009, 2008, one of the first years we done the Harris D expedition. We got a high power NOV, we got a 800 watt NOV for 6 meters. And the plan was we got donated, well, loaned a Discovery 6.4 amplifier. And we genuinely wanted to test on 6 meters, because we were going to be in a quiet location, how much power we had to use to work someone who, say, was in Liverpool with a high urban noise level. If they were using 100 watts and we could hear them and we needed 800 watts for them to hear us, we could do some sort of quantitative measurements of noise floor measurements. As it found out, actually, we realised we were too far away and we couldn't really work many stations on ground wave. But from the same point of view of FT-8, if we just go back to, I think I've maybe just deleted it, and it's overload at the moment, but let's just take these numbers for gospel. So Steve gave me plus 17 dB and I reported to him plus 13. With 4 dB of difference, theoretically, I could double my power and be the same strength as Steve, or Steve could half his power and be the same strength as I was. And from that, you can then start to work out where your system maybe has losses. So there's quite a lot of the time where I run 400 watts on 2 meters at the antenna, and I'll be working a German who gives me neg 10 dB and I'm giving him plus 5 or plus 10, 20, 15, 20 dB different. Why is that? When I'm running QRO, and there's no way he's 20 dB more power than I'm running if I'm running 400 at the antenna. So that tells me that they've either got a really high noise floor, local urban noise, or a really poor receive system. So regardless, irrespective, say, of what power you're actually running, the dB values are of interest because it gives you an idea of what conditions are like, what the station performance is like, etc. Because it's just dBs. You don't mind, it doesn't matter whether you're using 1 watt or 1,000 watts, as long as you're looking at the dB difference, then you can start making some educated assumptions, sort of thing. So if I take, in fact, it wasn't there, but the GM4 here, well, he's here actually, GM4 FEM, he's neg 20 at the moment. So there's about 4 dB of overhead there. He does fluctuate a little bit, but if I was to call him and he didn't answer me, I would make the assumption that, that's just noise floor issues or something. But if he was 5 dB or so and I called him and he doesn't hear me, I would probably be emailing him and asking what's wrong with his setup, sort of thing.
So how much power were you running just then when we had QSO?
Let me just check again.
You're 4 dB louder than me.
About 5 kilowatts, I should think.
That was what the amp was on. I don't know why I put the amp on. That was 300 watts at the amp, so that's
300. Yeah, I was
2.5 down. So that's probably about 280 at the antenna.
Yeah, I was running 25 watts in the out.
As I say, it was irrelevant to do that, to switch it on. It's just force of habit for some reason.
Yeah, I only put it on if I'm working Europeans.
Yeah, but yeah.
Scotland or something.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, Roger XBM, it's amazing, and like others have said, collinears and 5 watts or less, and the ranges that are able to be worked. But if you could understand what the other station's using, then you can then know whether it's your setup that's doing the work or their setup, for example. And it gives you an idea of what, as I say, whether you've got losses in your system that might need to be addressed, or lots of things like that. But certainly it's not, as I say, it's not a low power mode. That's not to say you can't use low power, that's fine. But if someone's giving you, if you're decoding someone at neg 20 and you run a watt, I wouldn't expect it answered straight away, is all I'm saying.
I see XBM is on.
Yes. Oh yes, there he is. Yeah. 13 dBs. Yeah, easy copy. Waterfall. You go. So yeah, because you can see that. I mean, actually, I may have to make a point of something here. Yeah, what was that around about 13? Sorry, I'm just trying to get my head round. Yeah, G4 GBA. This station here, the strong one, you can see he has second harmonic.
So only a car accident. She wasn't speeding.
And it actually looks like here he's got some other noises. There's a point, I think I removed it from the slide, but one other thing to make sure you do with your computer sound card is ensure that Windows is not using it as the default playback device, because otherwise all your email alerts and everything gets sent over the radio, and all you hear is bing bong. And that's quite frequent on HF. If you listen to FT-8, you'll hear people receiving emails as the audio gets sent through their sound card or data interface and in the radio. So in Windows, let me just bring up it's called sound. Just make sure that your whatever interface you're using for your radio is not the default, because as I say, otherwise when you get a notification like a new email or whatever, it will get sent through your data interface and out your radio, and the person at the remote end will hear your emails being delivered, which is probably what these noises are here on these ones here.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably something like an email alert or something in his audio. So yeah, so hopefully that's given people a flavour of either using, they're doing the thing right. I haven't heard anyone comment they're doing anything wrong tonight, which is good. I think everyone seems to understand the pitfalls. Hopefully the presentation, what's available to download at the moment, Brian, or is it up there now?
I don't think it's up there yet, but it will be up later on this evening if anybody wants to download the presentation. If I can just point you in the direction of the chat messages at the bottom of the screen. If you go on there, David's pointed us at a web page which he leaves running permanently, which might be of interest to people. Message from Paul as well to say he's worked Indonesia on his 10 watts this evening, so well done to Paul. Right,
Nice.
I think we're probably just about done now, unless anybody else wants to jump in with anything else. We pause to enable that to happen. And if not, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed to you, Gavin, for an excellent presentation. I've learned quite a lot from it this evening, so thank you very much indeed for doing that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gavin.
Yeah, no problem. Just as a side note, I've just called this Papa Delta, and he's obviously not running with